All right, welcome everyone to our webinar today. Happy Friday to you. We appreciate you spending your lunch hour with us. This is Becky DeCoyster. I'm the Director of Education here at Wellness Connection of Maine. And we have a very, very hot topic today and a very knowledgeable guest to talk us through what this topic might mean. And we, as you see, are going to be discussing cannabis legalization and what that means for Maine. And I'm joined by David Boyer, the campaign manager for the Campaign to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol. David, how you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I am happy it's Friday. I'm glad that you're joining us. Also here in the studio is Ben, producer Ben, making sure that all of the bells and whistles are dinging and whistling, and we appreciate him being there. He's waving to you all. And let's just dive on in. Actually, before we get started, I do want to point out, if you've just joined us, at the top of your screen you should be seeing a chat bubble, a talking bubble. If you mouse over that and you can pull that down, you will be able to send your questions in to us. Please go ahead and do that. If something comes up during the presentation that you have a question about, go ahead and send that, and then at the end we will do our best to answer all of the questions that we receive throughout the presentation. So if something comes up that you're curious to learn more about, that's the way to do it, that little chat bubble, and you can send that directly to us, or you can share your answer, your questions with the whole group, either way. So, with no further ado, let's get started, David. Let's talk about legalizing cannabis in the state of Maine. This is something that's coming up in many states. We've got 4 that are legal now, plus the District of Columbia, and many, many more are looking at it in this next election cycle. I guess a question I want to start with is why legalize, and sort of a related question, why now?
Yeah, well, support for ending marijuana prohibition is higher in this country and in Maine than it's ever been before. So it's our opportunity to change the laws here in Maine. We don't think we've had a chance. We've waited till 2016 because it is a presidential year where more people turn out and more young people turn out. And we know that young people support making marijuana legal far more than those that are 65 and over, presumably because they haven't been around to hear the government's exaggerations about the harms of marijuana, and we know now that marijuana is safer than alcohol. And so we have a good chance here with the presidential to make it legal here in Maine.
And you mentioned the over 65 demographic, and I have to say our members tend to skew older. We help a lot of folks who are over 65 and who are, arms open to at least the medical aspects of cannabis. And the graph that we have here shows a national Gallup poll from this fall showing the steady increase in approval ratings. This next graph looks at the national picture and kind of puts some numbers behind what you were saying about, that older demographic is really still hesitant about full legalization, even if they understand or begin to understand the medical aspects of it. So what do we say to these folks who have questions and concerns to help them understand where we're headed here? Or is the game just to get it done in a presidential year where we're going to have more Mainers at the polls in general and hopefully bring some of these folks along?
It's both. As your graphic shows, those that are 65 and up are the only people that don't support it overall, making marijuana legal. So, and unfortunately, these are the people that vote the most, is the older folks, right?
That's true.
And so we have to educate them. We know the facts are on our side, and over the last 3 years here in Maine, we've been, doing a lot of education and making sure that folks know that using marijuana doesn't make someone a bad person no more than having a glass of wine after work makes someone a bad person. It doesn't. And so it's really important that we stress that point because, advocates for legalization over the last 30, 40 years have said, you just tax it and make it legal and it'll solve our problems, but that hasn't resonated, and it hasn't moved the dial, and so if voters don't feel comfortable with adults using marijuana, then they're not going to support it. It's a moral issue. It doesn't matter how much money it's going to bring in or how much law enforcement resources are going to be saved. It doesn't matter because marijuana is bad.
Got it. So there is a percentage of the population that we're probably never going to convince on this issue.
Right.
But in this election year, in this cycle, and in Maine, we have some interesting, the presidential challenge will be one to watch, I think. But then there are also some other issues that Mainers will be voting on that will probably, I would think, bring out folks from each of those demographics.
Yeah, if Bernie gets the nomination on the Democratic side of things, it'll bring out a lot of younger folks as well and progressives. Donald Trump gets the nomination, then he might bring out some more conservative folks or older folks.
He has made some promising noises around,
he's actually the best on marijuana
Tell me
for
a little
Republicans.
bit about that.
Yeah, I think MPP gave him a C- or C+ as far as Republicans that are still in it.
And that was the top score?
Now he's the best shot right now on the Republican side of things, and like Jimmy Carter said, he's pretty malleable, so I think he'll go the way support is overall. But Maine's median age is 42 years old, which is actually the oldest. We're the oldest state with that in mind, so we have our work cut out for us. And Maine's also one of the least religious states as well, which will help us. So we're gonna turn out the young people and educate the old people and see what happens.
I was looking at the news, and just this week, Vermont, which does not have the Citizens Initiative process, their legislature looks like they're taking steps towards legalizing through the legislature. And I know we tried that here in Maine, and it didn't work. Can you give me your thoughts on maybe why we couldn't get it done legislatively? We do have both options here in Maine.
Yep.
What happened there?
Yeah, Vermont Senate passed legalization the other day. It's on to the House and to the governor's desk, and there's a good chance that Vermont could be the first state in the country to make marijuana legal through the legislative process rather than the ballot initiative process.
So why can't Maine?
Well, we don't have the high-level support in Maine that they do have in Vermont. Vermont's governor was a big player in supporting legalization and helping push this through and doing media and speaking on behalf of it. We had previous attorney generals speak out in favor of it. Recently, we didn't have that. Attorney General Janet Mills is kind of, indifferent on the issue. Governor LePage is kind of indifferent or against it. It's hard to track. He said he's for it if the people support it, but I think he's kind of rolled back a little bit on that since last year's election. And also, it wasn't our strategy because we knew we had the initiative option here in Maine that we don't have in other states like New Hampshire and Vermont. Our focus was on building support with these local campaigns, which we'll talk about, and educating folks that way rather than, paying for some lobbyists and spending a lot of time at the Capitol.
Well, and one of the things I note about this bill, the legislators are forward-thinking in that, the Senate has passed this, and they're at least willing to grapple with it, but I believe that bill does not allow for home cultivation. Is that correct?
I'm not sure.
Okay. I think that they may be looking at not having the adult's right to cultivate small amounts for yourself. And I think a citizens initiative is probably, definitely going to be more responsive to the citizens. This is how we see, this opportunity happening in our state.
Yeah, if that's the case, I'm not quite up to snuff on all the details of it. It's unfortunate that sometimes you need have some concessions to make progress, and we've seen other states add it in afterwards. I think Washington has home grow now, home cultivation.
I believe so.
They originally didn't,
right?
Because it doesn't make sense to prohibit it.
I think that's an important point. Before we move on, all of these legalization efforts, it doesn't stop once the law goes into effect. These are all works in progress. We've had medical here in Maine for, since '99 legally, and that bill is evolving every year.
I mean, we just rolled back a law from prohibition with alcohol recently in Maine. Bars couldn't advertise the ABV, how much alcohol by volume, in a beer, which is silly. You want to educate. Why would you
hide that information?
Somebody unknowingly buys a 10%. Beer and so responsible consumption.
Right.
So we rolled back that. This is what it's the first step, and it's going to evolve. And people shouldn't think what the initiative is now is forever.
Or written in stone, or not able to be changed once it. Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, let's move on. You mentioned.
But for the better.
Well, improved rather than changed.
As we educate Mainers in the legislature more and more, and they see how we've been regulating marijuana responsibly in Maine and other states, we don't expect it to roll back good pieces of laws.
Exactly. You mentioned a couple of efforts in Maine that we have already made to legalize or decriminalize, and I know that you had efforts in Portland and Lewiston and South Portland and maybe York. So let's talk a little bit about this. First of all, I want to set the scene by saying that marijuana is currently pretty much decriminalized for adult use. I'm not talking medical. Medical is a whole, it's fully legal in the state. But adult, recreational, or social use of cannabis is pretty well decriminalized here in Maine, is it not?
Yep, Maine passed decriminalization years and years ago.
Okay.
So it's not a criminal offense.
So
it's a civil offense.
What is the difference there between legal and decrim? Why is it decrim enough?
It's not enough because you're still breaking the law, and people who use marijuana, consume marijuana, shouldn't break the law. Some of these fines go up to $600, I think, for possession of marijuana. That's a lot at one time for anybody, at least in my circle of friends and colleagues. We're not highfalutin, so that's tough. And there's actually people in jail in Maine that are in jail because they couldn't pay their fine. So we have a debtor's prison in Maine, and that doesn't make sense. There's reform for that. But
so how does legalization fix that?
So legalization makes it actually legal. Like you can go into the store and purchase a beer. You can go into the store and purchase marijuana. So that's what we're shooting for. That's what Colorado has, and there's 4 other states that you mentioned, and that's what we're shooting for this November.
So decrim is kind of a half step, but legalization.
Decrim stops the bleeding, but you're still forcing adults to the underground market to purchase their marijuana.
Because it's legal under decrim. It's legal to possess, but not to sell or purchase, right?
Well, it's still not legal to possess either.
Okay. It's just not a crime. It's a civil.
It's a civil. Okay. It's a ticket.
Got it.
But a strong ticket sometimes.
Yeah.
And then so with these
let's look at these
local initiatives. We'll do it chronologically. In Portland, we, with the help of the Green Party, passed legalization, possession of 2.5 ounces or less by adults 21 and over. About 2 to 1, I think 67% of the town voted for it.
That's significant.
It was high turnout, close to the mayoral's race in 2011 as far as turnout, and they spent $200,000 getting out the vote then. So we didn't spend anything close to that. Just money for some flyers and some help, and we got about the same turnout. So that shows us that a lot of people, they were voting for the first time, and this motivated them to turn out that otherwise wouldn't. I was knocking on doors at 7 o'clock trying to drag some people out, and there was a 40-year-old woman, her kid. It took me 10 minutes to convince them to hop in my car and go up the street, but they did, and she voted for the first time in her life.
Wow.
And that was the only thing she voted for, and her kid was all fired up about voting, and that was great.
Wow.
So people come out for this. Politicians have let us down consistently. this presidential race. A lot of people are not happy with much of the choices there, and politicians lie. They tell us what we want to hear, but marijuana, it's consistent.
Support for it.
Support for it.
Tends to be, yeah. Okay, so Portland, you were successful. You were, we would say, wildly successful on the political side, and it was the first city on the East Coast to do this. How much does it mean? Can I go sit in Longfellow Square in Portland? And
it didn't allow for public consumption of marijuana.
Okay.
None of the initiatives that passed do, and the one in this November in 2016 statewide also doesn't allow for public consumption. Just like you're not supposed to walk down the street and drink a beer.
Right.
So we want to mirror those laws so that this thing can pass.
But in Portland, if I am an adult who is not a medical patient and I possess an ounce, is it?
2.5.
2.5 ounces of cannabis. There's nothing legally there's no repercussion for that. It's perfectly legal for me to possess that amount.
Unless the law enforcement in Portland wants to cite you under state law. So they said they have. They've also been a lot more lenient. So it's unfortunate. We tried to get them to respect the will of the voters, but that's the best we could do. Unfortunately, there isn't much enforcement we can do. That's why it's so important that we pass this year so that we have full legalization. The
state backing these individual municipalities that want to be forward-thinking, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
So then next year, after November, we tried in 3 more towns. In York, Maine, we were refused to place on the ballot, even though we collected enough signatures twice. City council said they didn't want it.
They just shut you down.
They refused to put anything on the ballot that was against state law, even though Portland did it last year.
Is it legal for them to do that?
Well, we tried to get an injunction, and the judge didn't quite agree with us on the injunction part. We could have took it further, but we kind of cut our losses there.
Choose your battles.
Politics isn't a zero-sum game, and we got lots of earned media during the York campaign, all the people we talked to, and we got their signature. That's valuable. The other 2 cities, South Portland and Lewiston. In Lewiston, we fell about 1,300 votes short. People don't vote as much in Lewiston, even though there's plenty of people, plenty of young people. They don't turn out as much.
Lower turnout, okay.
And it's very Franco-American, French Catholic, and that was kind of tough. So we knew it was a tough sell there, and that's why we did it there instead of Orono or Hollowell, because that wouldn't shock anybody that it sounds past legalization, just like not too many people were probably shocked that Portland passed it, maybe by the margins that they did.
Yeah, I think that's a good story.
Portland has somewhat of a reputation. And in South Portland, we were victorious. And it was interesting there. South Portland's, liberal, but it's definitely older, more residential than Portland. People, don't move around as much. And you had the city council there against this thing. You had the mayor, the police chief. I debated him, and all these, authority figures saying this is going to be bad for South Portland, and it still passes. So it just shows again, the people are ahead of the politicians on this issue for sure.
All right. Two images on this slide that I think we need to talk about. I think the media definitely plays a role in how the public views this, especially folks who aren't a medical patient or deeply involved in the push to legalize, or don't particularly care one way or another about cannabis. But the traveling billboard, very reefer madness of you, and then the celebration party after the Portland vote, and of course this picture of the XXL marijuana cigarette was plastered all over a media outlet that I won't name. Talk to me about how you decided to run that billboard, and then about what your thoughts are on the media's representation of people who want the right to use cannabis as adults.
Yeah, in Portland and in other states, we've had a lot of success with some would say controversial billboards. We don't consider the truth very controversial, but and those billboards get covered by the news, and then way more people see the news billboard than the actual billboard itself, and that was a strategy there with the mobile billboard, because in Maine actually billboards are illegal.
We can't have them.
So we had to drive around so they couldn't catch us. And
well, it's okay. Go on.
I plead the fifth. And so we were, as you see there, marijuana and scary letters. This was also some context during Halloween. And so we wanted to kind of make fun of Reefer Madness, which everyone pretty much makes fun of now. Even those people who don't think marijuana should be legal know that, what we were told in the 30s is pretty, not accurate and exaggerated. But we wanted people to give the facts that, why is this substance illegal when it is less scary, less addictive, less toxic than alcohol.
Right. How about the media representation?
Well, it was unfortunate that our supporters, as passionate they are, chose to break the law that didn't even pass quite yet after it passed outside. We, as a movement, need to be cognizant of some of the stereotypes that people that aren't as smart as us have of us, and that means that we have to dress up and cut our hair and talk, in terms that the electorate and soccer moms and business people talk in. So,
do you think there's a place for? I mean, one of the things that even patients grapple with, and especially folks who are in like low-income housing, is that there's no place where it is legal to smoke it. Or, if smoking is your choice of intake method, right? I mean, there's no place to, unless you're in your home and you happen to own your home and you're not going to get kicked out by your landlord or ratted on by your neighbor or, there's really no place to go.
We got that place in Bangor now, right?
There is a medical club in Bangor, yeah. And we'll talk about what the bill in Maine allows around social clubs, but
there's a need for it, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, people don't like to, whether it's for medicine or for, adult use, social use, humans like to be around each other, and, drinking by yourself is not necessarily the healthiest thing as well. So, marijuana is a very social, communal thing. It gets people talking, and it's creative. So there is a demand for that, and hopefully our bill will solve that.
And yes, absolutely. And I just back to your point, I think, we do need to be sensitive. I mean, I believe there's room for everyone. I mean, cannabis culture is a big, broad thing.
But the media definitely has a bias.
Yes.
We had someone who was willing to speak out and on the record say that they use marijuana illegally with their name and picture even for the newspaper. And then they took it a step further and asked her to smoke for the camera. And it's like they need their gratuitous shot. And it's unfortunate that, the Drug Policy Alliance did this really awesome project where they took stock photos of marijuana consumers and sent that to the media outlets, because it's always the same person, smoking the joint on Channel 6 or
as a
Johnny
woman,
with the joint.
Well, as a woman, I notice that it's so often a man. And that's not representative of who uses this medicinally or socially. So
it'd be great to see someone vaping or something, or just eating an edible or using a tincture instead of.
But those are low impact, and you don't have big clouds of smoke, and it's not visually appealing. Yeah,
it's not sexy.
It is not. Well, it's a frustrating thing that, again, our work is not going to be done the minute this becomes legal. I do want to move on a little bit to, is legalization going to increase social problems? And one of those problems is dependence rates, and we'll talk about a couple of others. These are things that we hear when we get pushback from folks who are either outright, opposed to legalization, or who are rightfully or, for good reason, hesitant or cautious or just not quite sure about it. And so the first thing I want to talk about is this going to increase the number of Mainers who have cannabis dependence? We don't call it cannabis addiction. The DSM, which is the manual that defines pretty much all of the ailments, has settled on this term substance use problems or dependence, substance dependence. So are we going to see more Mainers developing cannabis dependence?
I'm not sure. It's hard to say. I don't think you necessarily will, because we've seen in other states that increasing access doesn't necessarily equate to more use. And you look at the rates on the chart there, marijuana is one of the least addictive substances between legal and illegal substances. So if people are, not using tobacco and alcohol as much and using cannabis, then it's probably a public health win.
That's an interesting point. And I wonder, I don't know of any studies that are confirming any of this, but I do wonder if there's going to be any switching, if people are going to find that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a hot topic for researchers, whether there's that substitution. I imagine anecdotally that when people use alcohol and marijuana, they probably don't use as much alcohol and don't use as much marijuana
when they use them together.
A lot of people don't. A lot of people exclusively use cannabis as well,
or alcohol. So, it'll be interesting. One thing that a friend of mine said to me was, she has never used cannabis, and understands why it should be legal, but doesn't think that even when it is legal, she's going to try it. I think there are probably plenty of folks out there who are in that same boat. I mean, if heroin was legal tomorrow, I don't know that I would rush out and try it. That's not something that appeals, to me. So dependence, more people using, there might be, as the number of people consuming cannabis goes up, perhaps the number of folks that have a dependence issue goes up, but in general, those
probably just stay at 9%.
Stay at 9%, exactly. It will increase the number of adults who have access to cannabis. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer, of course.
Yep.
What about I'm just going to reveal all of these. What about the kids? Will it increase the number of under 21s who have access to it? This is something that we hear a lot.
I don't think that it will, because right now they have access to it.
That access is not regulated, right?
Exactly. Right now in Maine, the majority of marijuana is not regulated. It's not controlled. We don't know who's buying it, who's selling it, how old they are. When I was in high school, it was easier to get marijuana than alcohol because alcohol is regulated. You had to find someone to break the law. There's harsh penalties for selling to minors. I imagine those penalties are not as severe as actually selling marijuana to minors, and that's a shame probably. And so, look at prohibition. You don't have anybody selling, really like as a job selling alcohol to kids. You might have some scumbag that hangs out by the store, and our community takes care of people like that. But as a whole, you don't have someone making money doing it. But there's certainly people that are selling marijuana indiscriminately and making money doing it as a livelihood. So we need to take their product away from them and put it behind the counter. We think regulating it, like alcohol, where you have to show ID, it's actually going to have less children have access to it. We've seen in Colorado, they're bucking the trend. Youth use with marijuana is going up about 2% nationally, whereas Colorado went down 2%. In Maine, we have the lowest rates of teen use in New England, even though we've had the most expansive marijuana policy and medical the longest regulated program. So there isn't necessarily that correlation.
Well, and I think you mentioned Colorado is actually declining, whether it's statistically significant or not. It's certainly interesting to watch that. And I also know that Colorado youth, their perception of the risks of cannabis are going down, and I think that's in part due to years of being, growing up in an environment where medical cannabis is a reality.
But if, you're told when you grow up that marijuana is so bad that you'll die if you take a hit, then of course, when they realize that they don't die from marijuana, they're going to think it's less less harmful than it was.
Well, and your credibility as a messenger about abstinence comes under question too. If that's
we made that point before. We're not doing our kids any favors by lying to them about the relative harms of marijuana, alcohol, and other substances.
So the kids are smarter about this. They're better educated about this, and they're still not flocking to it in droves, is what you're saying.
Seems to be.
All right. We need to keep our fingers on that pulse, I think. And then finally, and you and I both served on a work group this last year about the topic of cannabis-impaired drivers. And are we going to see an uptick in cannabis impairment on the roads? Are we going to see more fatalities? Are we going to see more accidents?
I don't think that we will. It hasn't evidence hasn't bared that out in Washington and Colorado. There might be more people just cited for it because now they're checking for it, but I don't think it's changed the actual number of people on the roads. Obviously, you should not drive while you're impaired on any substance, marijuana, pills, alcohol.
Right.
It's not safe, and it's dumb. So I think it's important to mention that because some people think it's perfectly fine to smoke out, drive while you're smoking, drive while you're impaired, and it's not. And so I think we need to be cognizant of that. And
a piece of that puzzle is, and I think that the medical program kind of shows us a path forward here. We are required under our regulations to do a lot of education with our members on the medical side, and I think that that sort of approach to it is worthy of being considered when we go to a full adult use legalization scheme.
I think some common sense measures could make sense. Perhaps the legislature will, put something for, bud tenders have to say how potent it is, how long to wait before eating any more, the potential, don't drive while you do it, and then the customer has to check yes and on the pad that they've been explained about, marijuana. I don't know if that'll happen. It's not an our initiative necessarily, but the rules will be fleshed.
Even without a regulation forcing it, it seems like a smart retailer would want to do that.
And just like you don't serve visibly intoxicated patients, which I'm not sure how much of that problem is. It's obviously more of a problem when you have a bar and people are coming in.
Yeah, we don't run into that too much.
Drunk, you don't serve them because you could be liable because it's not a good thing to do. It's bad. Being a bad person, so we want to look out for our fellow humans.
Gotcha. All right. So we may not have definite yes or no answers on these, but
we will want to make sure that whatever law, if any, is passed regarding marijuana and driving while you're impaired, is based in science and evidence-based. And the evidence isn't out there right now whether 5 or 10 nanograms means you're automatically impaired. It seems like tolerance plays a lot more with marijuana than it does with alcohol, where the general populace is impaired at 0.08 blood alcohol level, but it doesn't seem the same way with marijuana. So it's really important that we're vigilant, our members, your members, with the upcoming legislation, so that we're not criminalizing patients for just driving when they used marijuana yesterday or this morning. It doesn't mean they're impaired.
Exactly. All right. I want to talk a little bit about, impairment and dependence. You mentioned that there are still folks going to jail for, possessing or using cannabis, and very often the other option instead of jail is going to a treatment center. And I just wanted us to spend a little, moment or two talking about, where does drug treatment fall into this scheme? Are we going to stop needing cannabis drug rehabs? Are we going to need more of them? If we're going to have a wave of people who have substance use disorder around cannabis, what's going to happen with that? And I just wanted to get your thoughts on this.
Is that Maine?
This information. Is this Maine?
Yeah.
This is no. This is from the national. This is the national study.
I imagine in Maine the treatment for marijuana referrals is a little bit less, but that just shows that we need to do this in November so that our neighbors where you are actually getting arrested for possession, simple possession, they change those laws. I think we have a neighborly duty, but as you see, people get caught and they have the judge says, do you want to go to treatment or jail? And most everyone's going to say treatment, of course, and then the prohibitionists, like Project Sam, they say, look how many people have been sent to treatment for marijuana, it's bad. And it's like, well, that's because the government forced them to go. And they leave that asterisk out of there.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that's so important about drug treatment is you need to at least be partially in a space psychologically where you're open to receiving
better.
Exactly, to getting better, right, and being forced with a jail or treatment, which I think for some people, seems like just a different form of jail, is is not helping them embrace the moment.
Well, with legalization, we're really pleased to see whenever you write an initiative in Maine, the Secretary of State and the people at the legislature that write the bills or help, edit the bills, they have to do a summary for the petition, and they also have to do a fiscal impact statement. And on the fiscal impact statement, they said that the savings from law enforcement costs and court costs like that would be significant. So they even kind of admit that we're spending a fair amount of money on this, and we're going to save that money.
Because if somebody is caught right now with more than an ounce and they don't have a medical card.
Yeah, but who knows how much time spent by police in people's interactions with marijuana that don't get necessarily a charge, but the officer's time and then of course the person's time being harassed about marijuana.
Right.
It's hard to quantify that.
Wow. This is a pretty significant change, and I think this next slide is really probably the one that many of our listeners today are the most curious about, the most worried about. Certainly something that in the movement/industry here in Maine has garnered a lot of sometimes contentious conversation. But I want to talk about how this bill would affect our medical marijuana program, and just to set the stage for how many Mainers are engaged and involved in that program. We know that there are at least 40,000, probably another, maybe as many as 50 or 60,000 people who are using this therapeutically in the state. We have 8 state licensed and regulated dispensaries that are employing, dozens and dozens of Mainers. And then we have 2,200 and more state registered caregivers. So there are a significant number of Maine citizens who are engaged in the medical marijuana program, who are giving back to their communities, who are paying their taxes. Isn't legalization gonna wipe this all away? Once it's legal for all adults, what happens to medical marijuana, David?
It's a $64 question. Depends who you talk to, but from our angle, we think and we'd like the medical marijuana program to continue to thrive. We see a necessity for it, working parallel with adult use marijuana. If there's regulations regarding dosage amounts, we need patients to be able to have highly concentrated edibles that maybe the adult use market doesn't need. Patients under 21 absolutely need their medicine. And the public's been educated recently about, especially children that use medical marijuana for epilepsy and other disorders. So
does this bill?
The bill doesn't touch the program. It explicitly says that it's not to,
there's
mess
language
with it.
in it that says
proactively says it. Yeah.
Okay.
And
all right.
People in the industry will be happy to know that dispensaries and caregivers get, equal preference towards going into the adult use market. So, we want the people that have been on the front lines to do this. We want it to be a success. So it only makes sense to, go with the folks that have been cultivating and manufacturing and selling and retailing medical marijuana already. And so
here's a question for you. What about folks who have been doing all of those things but not under the medical program? What about folks who might have a conviction on a cannabis possession crime? Is there anything in the bill that expunges their records the way I think Oregon did, or that encourages new businesses to employ these folks? I mean,
I believe, I don't want to say for 100% certainty, but I do believe that having a marijuana offense does not disqualify you from the application process for a license.
Okay. In the medical program, there's a clause that says that a marijuana offense does not disqualify you if the possession amount would have been legal under the medical marijuana regulations and statute.
Yeah, it might mirror that.
Does it mirror that? Okay. Good. All right.
But there's nothing, unfortunately, that expunges records or gets people out of jail.
Okay. But as we said, any one bill can't do everything, right? I mean, there's still work to be done once this passes.
And that's after this passes, I'm sure someone would get a lot of press and have a lot of support if they just introduced a standalone bill. That would,
And I think I want to say it's Oregon that did that. I want to say one of the...
You have the courts in Connecticut that have done something similar. When this passed in like Washington and Colorado, anybody that was in the process of being charged for marijuana, that just got dismissed. So those are, quantifiable, lives that will be affected by this all for the better.
Okay.
Gotcha. And, we think having an adult use, making marijuana legal for everyone will be a good thing. Good thing for Maine, a good thing for patients. Right now, there's plenty of Mainers that are using marijuana illegally, but therapeutically. And whether they can't afford a $300, for a doctor note, or they don't have a qualifying condition that the state, thinks they know best on how to, self-medicate,
right.
Then they have to break the law. And that's a shame. So, it took years for PTSD to be added and for it to take that long for our veterans to get to medicine is just not right. So this is going to open it up for everyone over 21, let all adults over 21 grow marijuana, grow at home privately, home cultivation, and it's going to improve the affordability of medicine and the selection of medicine.
I am glad you said affordability because I want to talk about that definitely. As we watch these kind of pioneer states play out, price has been such an interesting thing to follow, and for a dispensary operator here in Maine who maybe cashed in their 401k to start their business, or a caregiver who is growing at home and serving their 5 patients so that they can pay their rent. How do we, maybe the question is actually bigger about how do we, not over-regulate, not under-regulate, but how do we make this program accessible to anybody who wishes to enter it?
Great question. We have protections for small farmers.
Okay.
So we set up 2 tiers of canopy space, which I believe we'll go over shortly in another slide. And we're not looking to put anyone out of business. There's going to be those who are doing this as a business now. Legalization obviously opens up so many more people to be able to legally purchase marijuana, not just people who are patients. And we've seen in states that have medical marijuana and legal marijuana, the price has gone down of medicine, of marijuana. In Maine,
it's just basic economics, isn't it? If there's more supply, you can't, the highest price is going to, who's going to go to that store, right?
It is simple economics. More competition equals more consumer choice, which means better quality, which means you have stores, trying to get customers to come in, and that's a good thing for the consumer. It's not a good thing for illegal drug dealers. They'd like the price to continue to be high, and that's unfortunate.
Well, I have to agree. We're going to go into a little more detail on the medical program. Anything else?
Did you want to talk about, yesterday we talked about what it's going to look like a little bit. You'll have, legalization where we have stores, obviously, that look like the 8 dispensaries that will retail the marijuana. And you'll have different types of stores. You'll have stores where people are going to come in. It's more tailored towards people who know exactly what they want. They come in and out. Takes 5 minutes, thank you. Then you'll have, I'm sure there's a niche for stores to provide for people that have never used marijuana before. So they want to, they need the experience of the hand-holding.
Yes, we are going to get to that in 2 slides.
Okay.
I'm looking at my crystal ball, and I can tell you that that is going to happen. But I think that if folks are concerned that somehow this is going to end the medical program on January 1st of 2018, that is not.
It's not. The committee, the HHS committee that regulates medical marijuana, doesn't want to. They see the need for the program. They see it working in patients' lives. The chairman said he wants to continue it. So there's no plans for the dismantling of the medical marijuana program in Maine. Probably polls 80 or 90%. You'd be literally taking away medicine from a baby.
Right.
So that people don't want to do that. It's not palatable right now. There's no appetite for it. So I think it's important to not let the fear of what probably won't happen in the future, get in the way of making progress now, of actually making marijuana legal now for everyone.
Well, I know that that's a big concern out in, is it Oregon? Is it Oregon where there's kind of a push to blend these two separate programs? And I think that's something that Mainers need to stay on top of. And
if we're a divided movement, then prohibitionists and those who want to shut down these programs are going to notice and take heed and go for it and try to split a wedge between us. We're, for people that want to make marijuana legal in Maine, we're about 50-50. So we don't have the support to start cutting ourselves into thirds or halves.
So medical needs to support legalization supporters, and legalization supporters need to support medical and present a united front. I think that's is that a good way to say it?
A lofty goal, but yes.
A lofty goal, yeah. But, all right, well, let's take a look at how the program works right now, because I think this is something that even folks who use a dispensary or go to a caregiver maybe don't always understand. We are, first of all, regulated by the Department of Health and Human Services. Under our medical marijuana program, patients have three options. They can grow their own, they can go to an individual caregiver, or they can use a dispensary. As you pointed out, growing your own is protected under full legalization, so that won't just be patients or caregivers who can home grow anymore. In terms of the caregiver or the dispensary, we are vertically integrated. The intent of our law was to vertically integrate these businesses, and that means one single business has to grow all the product, package all the product, or make it into an edible or a tincture or a salve or an oil, and then package it. And then they also have to do the dispensing, whether from a storefront retail dispensary or via their home or a delivery service for many caregivers. This is a little, it's a restricted business model. And I think this kind of goes to some of what we just touched on in terms of division within the movement, the industry here, because there is not a strong business incentive for a caregiver and a dispensary to work together. And I think that's something that not everybody understands. Actually, I should not say that we are 100% vertically integrated, because we're 98% vertically integrated. Dispensaries are allowed to purchase from an individual caregiver up to 2 pounds of excess medicine per year.
Yeah, right? But you're right. The way it's currently set up doesn't let people in the industry kind of work together. Everyone's on their own island doing all the things they have to do, cultivating, process, selling, instead of just being good at one thing, which could also, keep the price higher than it should be, and just makes it harder for everyone. So, looking at legalization, businesses can choose to be vertically integrated, but they can also not be.
There's room for both.
Yep, you
options.
can have multiple licenses, or you can just have one.
So if I'm a chocolatier and I make really good chocolates, I can just get a license to do that and then wholesale those to another piece of the
Yep, you would sell your chocolates to a retail store.
Okay, well let's take a look at that. And again, the medical program regulated by the Department of Health and Human Services under the bill that we'll be voting on in November, assuming that all of the signatures get approved, which we should be finding out any minute now, right?
Next week.
Next week, all right. This legal program would be regulated by the Department of Agriculture, and it looks like there will be 6 license options. Can you tell us a little bit more about these, David?
Sure. Let's start from right to left. You have social clubs, which we're really excited about. This is the first time the legalization initiative that has a really good chance of passing has included social clubs or cafes, if you will.
They don't have them in Colorado? Or?
They don't have them in any of the 4 states. Denver's working on trying to get something similar to those set up, but no, they don't, and it doesn't make sense, because adults should have a legal place to consume marijuana, especially if it's legal. So, especially tourists, right, make up a big chunk of these early states sales, and so we don't want them using marijuana in the hotels, in their cars, in public parks. So just like we have places for people to legally use alcohol, we need a place for adults to legally use marijuana. So a social club would be pretty much a retailer that also allows for consumption on premise. So you can purchase marijuana at the store and then consume it there.
And as you pointed out earlier, that is so important, especially for cannabis-naive individuals, to have that first experience with an oil or an edible in a safe, welcoming environment where, you know, if something does go wrong, there are trained staff there to help you through it and talk you through it and give you water, you know. I really appreciate that piece of the...
but thankfully, marijuana is safer than alcohol, so there isn't too much you have to be worried about.
No. But, you know,
a bad experience is a bad experience, and we should mitigate that and mitigate trips to the ER.
So social clubs are going to be part of this education outreach.
Absolutely.
As well. All right, good.
So I guess we'll jump to a retail store, which is just a store where you purchase marijuana. Think of one of the 8 dispensaries. If they didn't do all the other stuff, growing and manufacturing, what you see on the storefront is what a retail store would be, just like you know, a beer and wine store. The testing facilities, which allows labs to test marijuana, test it for mold and other, you know, heavy metals, and also for potency and of THC and CBD ratios.
Here's a question for you, because, you know, we in some of the dispensaries have invested in some testing equipment. There are labs coming up around the state. There's actually a bill under consideration that would make it legal for those labs to handle medical marijuana. Will I need, if I'm a provider, a cultivator, will I need to send my cannabis out to be tested, or if I have the equipment, can I test it myself?
Stores, growers, manufacturers can do all their own in-house testing.
Okay.
The legislature might apply a rule that says
if it's labeled?
If it's labeled on the packaging that it needs to be not your facility, it has to be a you know, independent third party.
Okay. So if I'm going to put a thing on my packaging that says this is 13%, you know, or the range is 13 to 15% CBD in this, and I'm going to say that to a consumer, I need to have used an independent third party lab, perhaps.
Yeah, and you know, we also, you know, this is an initiative, it's not the law, so it's a charge to the legislature, and we tell the legislature to, you know, adopt rules about testing and research, standards, quality control, etc.
Got it.
You know, there was talk whether or not we should force, you know, mandate that all labs, all marijuana have a, you know, be tested by lab before sold to consumers. That ultimately, I don't believe, you know, made it in there, because what if there's only one lab in the whole state and there's a backlog, then it could be a whole mess, a bottleneck.
Gotcha. Okay. Got it.
Yep. And then next is product manufacturers. These would be people who want to make their own edibles, do extractions, concentrates, topicals, tinctures.
Depositories, you name it, right?
Yep, all of the above. So a product manufacturer, they would buy wholesale from a cultivator and sell wholesale to a retailer. Product manufacturer can't sell to a consumer directly, unless they have all the other licenses. Talked about the retail stores, and
you know, we're going to get into the two cultivation licenses or tiers, but before you go on, you mentioned wholesale sales, and I know that in some states that have or are considering legalization, there's a tax at each stage. So when it goes from the cultivation facility to a product manufacturer, there's X amount of tax. And when it goes from the manufacturer out to a retail store, there's another layer of tax that the businesses are paying before it even ends up in the consumer's hand, and then the consumer ends up paying a higher price because the businesses are trying not, you know, I'm sure they tried not to pass those costs along. How does taxation work in the proposed bill?
It's pretty simple, actually. It's a 10% flat tax at the point of sale. That's the only tax, so cultivators, manufacturers, they don't have to worry about it. It's only when the consumer purchases is that 10% tax levied. And, you know, it's important when writing an initiative for legalization to kind of figure out what the sweet spot is for taxes, because you got to kind of balance different interests. On one side, for a lot of people, especially people that don't use marijuana, the tax is an attractive, tax revenue is,
Right.
attractive towards passing legalization.
So they say we'll pass it, but only if you tax it at 20%.
They want the millions, and then you have obviously the industry that doesn't want anybody working, doesn't want the high tax for obvious reasons. But also there is the fact that if you put a high tax on marijuana, then it could end up costing more when you add on the regulations than the black market. We've heard that from a lot of folks, and so we think 10% is definitely a fair tax that's going to satisfy both those interests.
And it is higher than, the medical patients.
Medical's taxed already, unfortunately.
It will continue, presumably it will continue to be taxed at the level that it is, which is lower than 10%.
Which is lower, so it gives somewhat of an incentive for those patients to purchase, to continue from the provider.
Got it.
But, we talked earlier about the price coming down, across the board, and I think that will happen when you think about the cost of prohibition. If you were to quantify the risk involved and the cost of doing an illegal business, of not being able to write off deductions, tax stuff, what is that, 40, 50, 60%? So when you compare, it's obviously hard to quantify, but if you're to compare that, it's obviously far less than 10%. So
we'll be surfacing a currently gray market industry. Will be and hopefully suctioning, not the day of legalization, not January 1st, but over time the force will suck people away
black
from
market
that
will go away. Just like kind of mentioned earlier, we passed prohibition of alcohol. It didn't work. We repealed it, and there's not
there are still moonshiners. There's still people making good white lightning, but
mostly for fun and for their own personal consumption. There's not, a huge bootlegging industry that there was in the 30s with Al Capone.
Right.
It's just not there.
Right.
It's you take away the incentive, the price incentive, the profit incentive, and
the market, the consumer moves.
Consumer wants to purchase legally. They don't want to have to deal with criminals. They don't
want it clean. They want it safe and convenient.
Right now, people are forced to go to the black market. You can be robbed. You're going to go to the police and say you got robbed for the weed that you're buying.
Right.
People selling weed could be robbed. What are they supposed to go to the police officers? So we take away the violence, the criminal element out of it, and it works.
So let's talk growing. I understand that there's 2 tiers of cultivation license, and the bill suggests a starting cap around the statewide. There's going to be 800,000 square feet of plant canopy available to however many licensees it breaks down to be. And talk to me a little bit. So some of these are going to be tiny, and some of them are going to be bigger, and all put together, they can't exceed 800,000 square feet.
Right. So unless the legislature thinks and the people thinks that cultivation is not enough, and we'll know that if the price is higher than it should be, if demand's not being met, right?
Okay.
So there's 2 tiers, 0 to 3,000 square feet of canopy, and 3,000 to 30,000. And then it's interesting, the way it's written, you can actually purchase 10 by 10 units of cultivation space. So, that allows caregivers to only, or, anywhere else getting into the market, only have to purchase and pay for what they're using instead of some cookie cutter.
Right.
I have 700, but I have to pay for 1,000. So
got it.
It allows for
a micro business. 100 square feet is nothing. You could do a lot with it, but it's not. You don't need a building. You don't need.
Yeah, it's versatile for what you need, and then again, caregivers and dispensary operators will get first bite of the apple for these licenses
if they choose to enter
if they want to, or they can continue what they're doing now. But we do think that they should get that preference, especially because they've been risking their behinds with the threat of the federal government coming down, serving patients. Like you said, they cashed in their 401k. They put everything on the line to potentially be raided tomorrow, for all they know. If one of these Republicans gets elected president, who knows their attitudes towards legalization. A lot of it is dictated at the executive. we think it makes sense. If the 800,000 is not enough, we'll change it. We'll increase it.
There's a mechanism to expand it.
Yep.
Good. And not on this slide, but I can't say it enough, home grow is protected. 6 plants for anyone 21 and up. There's just no entry into a sale market, right? If I'm growing for myself, I can do that, but I can't.
Just like if you brew home brew, you're not supposed to sell it. And that's the only license, the cultivation, that has a cap. The other licenses, the retail, that's up to your town. So the values of Hollowell aren't the values of Millinocket, and some may choose to only have a couple licenses, all the licenses, none of the licenses. But that's going to be done at the town level.
So we may see, similar to Oregon, we may see some parts of the state that just don't want these businesses, or they only want cultivation because they can put it out somewhere and not have to smell it or think about it, but they don't want the retail stores.
Or vice versa.
Okay, got it. So it's a very flexible and distributed model.
Yeah, we're not forcing anything down town's throats or anything like that.
Local control. Excellent. All right, we are heading to our finish line here. I want to very briefly talk about the fact that there were 2 groups with 2 separate initiatives, and you did come together. And I think that maybe we're not all singing Kumbaya, but I'll tell you what, submitting 103,000 plus signatures when you only needed how many?
61,000.
61,000, and we're going to find out for sure what the final result is next week, you said?
Yeah, but these signatures are pre-validated by the towns, and we know our pre-validated number, and it's a healthy cushion on top of that 61,000. So there'd have to be something that have to go really wrong if we don't get that email on Wednesday. But
great to hear.
We're looking good.
Okay.
Yeah. So the backstory is, some people may know, we tried to collaboratively draft this initiative back in December, January of a year ago.
Much of last year.
Try to bring in the dispensaries and caregivers. Unfortunately, there wasn't one set of rules that everybody could agree on, and so we, as a nonprofit group that wanted to pass this, wrote what we thought was a middle of the road initiative that could most importantly pass, and would also give equal preference to dispensaries and caregivers, and be as fair as we could as far as the market and that stuff.
And Legalize Maine did the same thing, right? So
Legalize Maine did as well, and so over the spring and summer we started collecting our signatures for each of the petitions, got to the fall and realized that both of us were in striking distance of actually both making it, which both knew would pretty much capsize efforts to make it legal. And
we would shoot both of them in the foot, right?
Yeah, 2 initiatives, not good to pass the same initiative. It confused voters. Nobody wanted 2 initiatives. Everyone didn't really have an opinion either way. They just wanted one. And so that's what we gave them.
So we took that language that Legalize Maine had come to and then added the funding and experience. I mean, MPP, I think sometimes gets an undeserved bad rap, but I mean, we're
responsible
laws,
for
right?
Colorado. We're responsible for Alaska making marijuana legal. We wrote the 2009 medical marijuana initiative in Maine, with countless other medical marijuana states. Some of the conspiracy theories around MPP is just
maybe that'll be another webinar. Just all about the conspiracy theories. But you have to respect the funding. And the experience, the experience in changing laws that MPP brings to the table, and I think added to a very homegrown, grassroots, caregiver-driven initiative language. I think it's almost the best of both worlds. I sometimes hear people who don't think that, but in terms of political reality,
these initiatives were 90% the same to begin with. They both had home cultivation. They both didn't touch the medical marijuana program. So here we are. We knew that this was too important not to not screw up. So we knew one would pass, having 2 wouldn't, and we did it for the better for Maine. For Maine.
So the benefit of Mainers. How about that? Because our next chance would be an off-year election or 2020, and I don't know anybody who thinks it's a good idea to wait that long.
Yeah, I mean, as we talked earlier, turnout's everything, right? And that's why other reforms have failed in the past, California, Oregon in 2010, partly because it wasn't united and partly because it wasn't a presidential.
Right, right. All right, so let's talk timeline, and then we'll get to folks' questions. Here's what we're looking at. We're going to have the signatures verified by the 29th, maybe Easter Wednesday, so, okay, the 2nd of March. Election is on Tuesday, the 8th of November this year, and literally the very next day, the legislature will be tasked with the rulemaking to sort of, why isn't the initiative enough? Why doesn't it just poof?
Well, you know, we wish they would, like, copy and paste our bill in there, and then we could make it even better. But this is just it's not a constitutional amendment. This is a citizens initiative, so it's not statute. Okay. And so this is think of it as a charge by the people that we want this done. The legislature needs to do it now, okay. And here are the constraints. Here's the guidebook to do it.
Okay, so this is not statute. When it passes, it's still not statute. What's going to happen over this fall and winter is that our legislature is going to do their job and turn it into statute.
They'll flush it out. We talk about the rules they have to come up with regarding employment or, labs, and then they go from there. Okay, got it. And that is a long and arduous and tedious process. And man, if anybody listening, thinks that it's okay once November 9th dawns, our job is done and we just sit back. No. We need to keep in touch with our legislators and let them know, that we expect them to do a good job for the people of Maine throughout this next session. One thing does go into effect very promptly, though, on December 8th, 30 days after the election. Home growing will take effect. Legal. Any adult over 21 can cultivate, not for sale, but cultivate for themselves in their own home. Yep.
That is that's closer than I think many of us could have imagined,
This year.
Yeah, before Christmas.
Just in time.
Just in time for Christmas, that's it. So then in spring of throughout fall, winter, spring of 2017, the legislature is going to be making the statute. It's going to be finalizing the rules and opening a request for proposals process to start handing out licenses, correct?
Hopefully.
If all goes well.
If all goes well.
They did it really quickly with the medical program. That passed in November, and by, I think, March I
think there's going to be a lot of scrutiny and a lot of interest in this, and they can't drag their feet on it.
No, I would agree with that. And that process is going to probably take into the summer, and then businesses are going to start getting up and running, and January 1st of 2018, we'll have full adult legalization for those over 21, and a side-by-side coexisting medical program that has not been touched.
All goes to plan.
Gutted. All right. That's the timeline. That's the plan. If you want to learn more, you can check out some of these resources. There's the campaign website. You can read the actual full text of the initiative on that site. Marijuana is Safer, a fantastic book that is sort of the backbone of the theme of this whole movement here in Maine. It is safer than alcohol. And so why does alcohol get ads in the Super Bowl? Why does Peyton Manning get to give Budweiser a prop in his post-win speech when folks who choose a safer option are demonized? And then David was kind enough to share his personal email address. You are a brave man, David. I know you probably
bring it on.
You probably get some pushback sometimes. Anything that we're missing here? Any other resources or?
No, please go to the website and sign up and get involved so you're on our list and we can keep you up to date with what's going on. Put your name so we know you're a supporter. Donate money to the campaign. The only way we're going to win is by being on TV.
Okay, what's the money going for? Why do you need money?
We need money to educate folks to push back and beat back on 80 years of government lies and exaggerations about the harms of marijuana. So the best way to do that is still through TV, being in everyone's living rooms, at 7 o'clock, and that costs money. It's a presidential year, so there's going to be even more ads, and the cost of the ads are going to go up because, the presidential year. So that's primarily where most of the money will go to mail, go to web ads, go to gas, pizza, volunteers.
Advertising is a fancy word, but I think in a case like this, a lot of that is going to have to be educating, right?
That's what the advertisements will be. It will be saying, hey, marijuana is safer than alcohol. Why are we driving people to drink? Regulations work. Drug dealers don't check ID. We'll have law enforcement explaining that they're tired of, having to go after folks who are smoking marijuana instead of, the real crimes taking place in the state.
Absolutely.
So we got the facts on our side. It's just a matter of
getting them out there.
Being louder than the other side.
Well, maybe some debates. Maybe we need to have you back in another couple months for further conversation and discussion about all this.
Yep.
Folks, if you're still listening, we have time for a couple of questions. If anybody has any, I'm looking at producer Ben. He is shaking his head. He's saying, no, there's no questions. I think we covered everything so well, David, that it's just completely crystal clear.
Well, my email's up there. Your email's up there.
Yep.
We're accessible.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you guys for joining us on a beautiful Friday. I hope you have a lovely weekend. This is Becky and producer Ben and David Brewer of the Campaign to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol, thanking you for your attention and signing off.